Hello, bright and beautiful world. Welcome back to my channel, and I have another book review for you today. The book that I will be reviewing is Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined by Stephanie Meyer, and basically what this book is a gender bend of Twilight. So if anybody has read Twilight or been with the Twilight fandom, you know the story of Bella and Edward and Jacob, and the love between the two. But basically, the story is just a kind of alternate universe gender bend of the original Twilight novel. So instead of having Bella and Edward, we have Beaufort or Beau and Edith. So basically, anybody who was a girl in Twilight is now a boy, and anybody who was a boy in Twilight is now a girl. So we have these different names, different genders, but the premise of the story is basically the same, with a couple of add-ins that Stephanie Meyer decided to add in, like extra conversations that she felt was needed in the original story, but just never made it. And also different plot points and different endings. There's an alternate ending to how the original story went. So those are the things that I will be talking about today. If you don't know the story of Twilight, I will give you a brief one right before my spoiler-free review. But basically, it's just a gender bend. So the characters are swapped in gender, nothing too major except for the kind of plot points that I'll talk about in my spoiler-filled review, and kind of briefly mention without being too spoilery in my spoiler-free review. So let's get started. Okay, so to kind of get started with the spoiler-free review, I just want to briefly mention that this novel is not a standalone novel. Yes, my copy is its own book. It's about 400 pages. But I do know that when it was first released in 2015, I believe, it was for the 10-year anniversary of Twilight. So one of the first books that they had out for sale that included Life and Death was a double-sided Twilight book. So on one side you had the original tale of Twilight, and if you flipped it over, then you had Life and Death. I know that they later released these single copies of Life and Death, which I currently own, but basically it's just the same story, and this is considered bonus content. It's not considered a standalone novel. It's bonus content for a novel that was released many years ago, which is Twilight, and it was just for the 10th anniversary of the original Twilight novel, instead of releasing Midnight Sun, which was supposed to be Twilight from Edward's point of view. Stephanie Meyer decided to release Life and Death, the gender bend novel, which is Twilight Reimagined, as bonus content because of the fact that Midnight Sun had been, released and kind of given out too early. So this is just bonus content. I'm trying to base it on that rather than the actual thing being a novel. It's kind of different, but most of my points will focus on the fact of what makes it kind of a novel, and what also just makes it good bonus content. So to start with the spoiler-free review, I do want to talk about the fact that I loved these characters. There wasn't a point where I didn't completely feel that these characters weren't the same characters. Of course, they are technically different, but I will say that I felt that Edith and Beau were stronger main characters than Edward and Bella. So when I originally read the Twilight series, Bella is supposed to be a kind of blank canvas for any person who decides to read the novel to kind of step into those shoes and just kind of have their way with the story as they will. And in that turn, I felt that Bella was a little too bland. There were parts where I couldn't see her, I couldn't understand her. Even though I loved that novel so much, there were parts where I didn't completely feel that Bella was the best main character. But in Beau's case, I felt that it was beautifully done. He felt like a stronger character. I felt like I could see things clearer through him. I knew his intentions, I knew his thoughts, and this could all be because of the fact that Stephanie Meyer had already written Twilight and she had already gotten through all of that. So she knew what she was working with and, added the different things in there. But just within the first 4 chapters, I was like, this dude is so much better than Bella. And I didn't see anywhere that I felt like I lost him or that I wasn't seeing him clearly. I could see him perfectly. He was a great main character to follow. Edith was absolutely strong. She was so much stronger than Edward, just because of the fact that I could see her more clearly. She had more emotion in a way, and I don't know if that's because of the fact that her being a girl now, so I felt more closely tied to Edith because of that. But I do think that they were both very strong main characters, and there was nowhere that I felt that they kind of slipped or lost their touch. They each just had their very own individual character that I was able to follow and kind of get along with. They just kind of carried this story on their own in the same way that I kind of hoped Bella and Edward would, but they didn't quite. So I really loved the fact that these two main characters really got me interested and had me going for the entire story. And I really like the fact that you're kind of going back to something. It's like picking up Twilight after 10 years and rereading it, but with a kind of newer, fresher take. So it was really nice to see all of those old characters back, even if they were like different. It was nice to kind of, be like, oh, this is this person, and oh, this is that person. It was nice to kind of have those moments of, oh, and kind of, being like, oh. And so it was just really great to have those moments. I will say that in terms of the negative aspects, if you do read this novel or bonus content, that there are some things that might be confusing, especially if you haven't read the Twilight series. It's basically just a kind of rough skeleton of that, but added with Beau and Edith and like their different experiences. But I will say that some of these things are meant for people who have already read Twilight. So if you decide to just pick up this novel on its own, some things will be like explain. Some things that kind of go along with that are the Volturi. They're mentioned quite a bit, and I do believe that the Volturi aren't even mentioned in the original Twilight series until like the second or third book. So those are just some things to think about. The ending will definitely leave you with a lot of questions, especially if you haven't read the Twilight series before. So just keep that in mind if you decide that you want to take a whack at this book before any of the original Twilight novels, because of the fact that it's basically bonus content, not a standalone novel. So just keep that in mind if you do want to pick this up. And if you have read Twilight and have never even heard of this, because I hadn't even heard of it until like 2 months ago. So if you haven't heard of this and have read the Twilight series, I highly recommend it. It's just a great fun read that I think any Twilight fan would enjoy. So definitely check that out. I do want to move into the spoiler-filled review just because there's not much I can say in the non-spoiler review that kind of isn't going to already be stated in the spoiler-filled. So if you do plan on reading this novel, please, please, please skip ahead to this time code so you can figure out what book I'm doing next. And just let me know what you think, and we'll go from there. Okay guys, so we're going to get into the spoiler-filled review, which covers plot points and different points from the book that if you haven't read the Twilight series or haven't even read this book yet, I highly recommend you skip to the time code that I will leave right here. And just kind of get your own feel for it and read it for yourself. If you haven't and you don't really care, then you can go ahead and continue watching. But these are going to cover some of the major points that I saw in terms of comparing them to Twilight and also kind of just talking about this standalone bonus content on its own. So definitely keep watching if you're interested in that, and if not, please skip to that time code and figure out what the next book will be. So we're going to jump right in with the fact of Julie. So Julie is the female counterpart of Jacob in the original novels, and Jacob has a really strong character in the Twilight series because of the fact that he imprints on Bella's daughter in the later novels. But what I found with Julie is that because she didn't have that connection to Beau, because of the fact that Beau can't have kids, I felt like she was a lesser main character because of the fact that she wasn't a false love interest anymore. She didn't have that like appeal or that, majority. She's still in the novel and she's still a great character, but the point that she's not a love interest anymore, I felt kind of made her character less because of the fact that she has no reason to constantly be all over Beau, and the fact that Beau is not going to be all over her because, of course, his love is with Edith and not with Julie. I wanted Julie to be, she's a great friend for Beau, and I love the fact that they're just friends and he can have this friend and he can have this connection. But I just felt like Julie wasn't in the novels as much, and she didn't have as great as a purpose of being in the novel anymore because she's not having that same, price and like reasoning as Jacob had for Bella. So I kind of wanted her to be a little bit bigger in the novel than she was. It was great to see her when she did show up, but I wanted her to have more. I wanted her to interact with Beau a little bit more than that and kind of show maybe a little bit of interest, even though Beau can't have the same interest. But I completely understand that that's different because of the fact that Beau is not supposed to have kids. So there isn't going to be a complete appeal to the two. And I still appreciated the friendship relationship. I think I just wanted there to be more of Julie because of how strong and prominent Jacob was in the Twilight series. Not too much of a big negative, kind of just something of me where I wanted to see more because I loved the Black family and I loved the whole story of the Quillets, the Quillet tribe, and I just wanted a little bit more of her in the story rather than just this used to be Jacob and now it's not. So just a little bit more of her kind of would have helped a little bit. Another thing that I wanted to talk about that constantly happened with me was because of the fact that I read the original Twilight series and then read this book. I kept putting all of the original names and original faces to these new names and new faces. So every time I would see Edith, I would think of Edward, or if I saw Archie, I would think of Alice. And some of the characteristics that each person had in the Twilight novels kind of transferred into this book, and I felt like a little bit of them were off. Like Royal being so bitchy, I didn't completely get that. Royal is supposed to be Rosalie, and I kind of didn't see the connection between the two. So I kind of just wanted a little bit more of like distinct differences between the female and male versions of those characters. So I kept putting the same faces and names to the people in the book. And when you're first introduced to the Cullens, of course, as in Twilight, you're bombarded with the names and bombarded with the personalities. So it kind of took me a minute to put, who was who. I had to put Emmett and Royal and Archie and Alice, and I needed to take a minute to kind of figure out, oh, this is supposed to be Alice, this is supposed to be Rosalie, this is supposed to be Emmett. So it kind of just took me a minute, and when I did finally get everything together, I kept switching the gender roles a couple times. So that was a little bit confusing, but I think that was just because I had already lived with the Twilight novels for so long and had known them as one set way, so having them be different was a little jarring. But I still really enjoyed the new names and the new characteristics that some of these characters had, especially Beau and Edith, so it was kind of nice to see the difference with those. That was just a little bit of a jarring thing, but I still think, if as long as you can get past it after the first couple of times that you meet these characters, then it's not that big of a deal. It was just something that I wanted to briefly mention. I did want to say that there was a lot of controversy, I know when the book first kind of came out, was the major spoiler, the ending of Beau becoming a vampire. So the original Twilight novels is 4 novels long, and it ends with Bella becoming a vampire. So I figured that even if Beau became a vampire at the very end, there wasn't a problem for me with that. I think because we all knew that was going to be the end goal. Even with 4 novels in the Twilight series, we knew that Bella was going to be a vampire in the end. So cutting Beau's story down by 3 novels didn't seem like a bad thing to me, especially because where else was he going to go? What else was he going to do? There wasn't going to be an imprinting with Julie. There wasn't going to be a baby because he can't give birth, and neither can Edith. So it just seemed like the right thing to do rather than just kill him off. So I liked the idea of having Beau be a vampire at the end, but most people really didn't like that. And I thought that Stephenie Meyer had a great afterword talking about that. And something that I kind of wanted to pinpoint in terms with that was the amount of trauma that each of these characters had to go through. So in the novel, instead of being able to return back to his family after the incident with the vampire, that's the tracking vampire, the hunter, after Beau comes back, he's a vampire and cannot see his family. So in Bella's story, she's able to see her father and the rest of her family. She's able to talk to Jacob and all of the wolves. And so she has that. And she's able to come back from her tantrum when she's trying to leave Charlie to go to Phoenix. And she says those harmful things to Charlie, and she's able to come back and apologize for those. Beau does not. Beau is not allowed to go back and tell Charlie that he didn't mean any of the words that he said because he is dead. So I feel like in terms of that, Beau has more trauma than Bella does because of the fact that he's never allowed to see any of his family again. Not his mother, not his father, not any of his friends that he had. He's not allowed to do any of that. And he has to constantly live forever with the knowledge that he said these things to his father and is not allowed to take them back. So I thought that that was a bigger deal to me than some of the things that Bella had to go through. Yes, she had to deal with the fact that Edward left her. Yes, she had to deal with the fact that a vampire was after her. Yes, she had to go through the whole thing with Jacob, and she had to go through the whole aspect of dying through giving birth. But she still ends up being a vampire and has everything in her world that she can have, so she gets to have all of that. She has her whole 4 novels full of things that go on, and nothing too major happens. Everything that does majorly happen is rectified at some point near the end of those novels in some way. But for Beau, he never gets that rectification because he never gets to tell Charlie sorry or to say that, the words that he said, he didn't mean them. He doesn't get that. So I felt, for me personally, that Beau had more trauma than Bella did, or he had longer lasting trauma than Bella would. I just felt like there was too much back and forth of like, oh no, Bella had it harder, or no, Beau had it harder. For me personally, they both suffered long things, different things, stronger emotions. But I think that in terms of not being able to go back and tell his father, hey, I didn't mean any of that thing, anything that I said, and still not being able to see any of his family after he's been transformed, I thought was a big deal and a much harder trauma than Bella had to endure. So one of the last few things that I want to talk about in terms of like the negative things is the difference between Beau's trip to Port Angeles and Bella's trip to Port Angeles. So in the Twilight novels, there's a trip between Bella and her friends to Port Angeles as they're looking for like prom dresses and stuff like that. And so that's when she kind of starts doing her research on if Edward is an actual vampire or not, like that kind of thing. She's going through her theories and like looking for things that can help her figure out what is this dude's deal. So basically for Beau, he has the same kind of thing where they, his group of friends go for prom shopping and his friends are looking for suits and they're like checking ties and that kind of stuff. And then he decides to go off and do his research. So basically for Bella, she's attacked by this group of men, and it's kind of implied that they're, thinking sexual things towards her and, trying to catch on with her in that kind of way. And for Beau, it's not because of the fact that I think he's a male. So it's briefly mentioned earlier in the book that while he's at the airport with his dad, with Charlie, that he sees this woman and this guy while they're getting their luggage, and he's, notices them and says that they're off, and that's all you kind of get in the beginning. And then as soon as you get into the Port Angeles scene, you kind of see why they became important. And it's because this woman thinks that Beau is a cop. And it's supposed to be this whole thing of like they have drugs or they're doing something shady and they think that he's a cop, and so the boyfriend turns the gun on Beau, and that's kind of the whole thing. Why I'm bringing it up is the fact that I thought that it wasn't a strong enough thing. I think that it was kind of one of the weaker points in the book, in terms of like bringing back the same things, the same situations that Bella went through for Beau. I just thought that his like encounter wasn't kind of completely there. it kind of felt forced in a way, kind of just to give him a reason to kind of have someone up on him. And I didn't understand why Edith was so upset. Like, I get if she was upset that they thought, like, oh, we gotta kill this guy. But it made more sense in terms of that Bella and Edward story, because Edward obviously has feelings for Bella and doesn't want anyone else thinking of her in that way, or, having that, like, having to go through that situation, I guess, which makes sense, but at the same time, it didn't make sense for Beau's story. So I think if there were still those elements of, a woman trying to, get up on Beau, and then Edith was mad about that, like, following that same structure and that plot, I think would have worked. But the idea of having them think, like, oh, he's a cop just because they saw him with a cop, I didn't think that was a strong enough reason for them to come and attack him. Like, I get if he, like, stopped and was like, hey, what are you doing? But he literally does his best to avoid these people at all costs, and they still follow him, which I guess could be a real life situation. I've never been in it, thank goodness. But at the same time, I just didn't feel like that was a strong enough, like, plot point in order to, like, keep the flow of it. It just felt a little bit too forced for the story, and I wanted a little bit more rather than having just that one thing, if that makes sense. So I guess that was, like, one of the, like, major, but, like, plot points that I kind of wanted a little bit to be, like, it was too different, I guess, in a way, because everything else kind of felt so similar to the original novel that I wanted it to be a lot more similar to the original novel and not so, like, out there, if that makes sense. So one of the other things that I want to talk about that will kind of feed into the positive stuff is the idea of gender roles in society. And I know that when this book came out, that it was a huge topic of, like, gender roles and what it means, because most people were saying that Bella is just a normal damsel in distress, and that she can't do anything for herself, that she needs a man. And for a while, I thought the same thing because of the fact that, like, Bella kind of is a passive character and doesn't really do much, besides, like, kind of observe these vampires and, like, fall in love with one. But I completely understand. As soon as I watched a couple videos of Stephenie Meyer kind of describing and kind of talking about her, like, process and her thoughts about, like, the way people were reacting to that. And it makes sense because the fact that Bella's human and these are, like, basic superheroes. She literally can't do anything for herself when it comes to these vampires because they're just too powerful compared to being a human. So it makes complete sense that she's not going to be able to do much. And I agree with the fact that this kind of feeds in with Beau as well. Usually when you think of, romantic stories, you think of, the male, finding the woman and helping the woman out. And I will say that it felt kind of easier for this story to kind of work out that way. I felt like there was less to kind of pinpoint on the fact that, yes, he's a male and needing a female. And that kind of goes against, gender roles in society, whereas it's supposed to be the man saving the woman. But I like the idea of having both because it shows the fact that it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl. It's the fact that these are vampires. They're basically like superhumans. They're super fast. They have influence over the human mind. And I just thought that was kind of a perfect way for Stephenie Meyer to kind of stick it to these people who are like, oh, she's a female who can't do anything. And that's not true. I definitely feel like this kind of gave her that way to kind of show people, no, it doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy. These are vampires. These are, superhumans who can do and be, stronger than any human that's out there, So I really liked the idea of having these gender swapped, moments where you see these different characters acting in different ways or going through the same situation, but having, to see it in a different way because of the fact that they're not the same gender. So because he's a guy and because she's a girl, I just thought it was a really good, way of showing it doesn't matter who you are. It is what it is. Like, this is just how this world works, and it doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy. They're superhumans. And so I really liked that. And I think that was the biggest kind of societal, like, gender roles thing that I saw when I was looking at reviews and, like, reading, and like that kind of thing. And I didn't have a problem with the fact that Bella was a girl, mostly because I was a girl myself, and so it was nice to kind of be able to do what Stephenie Meyer wanted, to put myself in those shoes and kind of see this world as it plays out. Especially because it was a time when kind of the only thing we knew about vampires was Anne Rice and Bram Stoker's Dracula, and like those kind of things, and seeing vampires in a different light and kind of being in a more like modern twist type way. So I think that was the only thing that I had a problem with, was the fact that she didn't have much to her character. I didn't have a preference in the fact that she was a girl or a guy. I just needed more of Bella's character because I didn't quite see her as much as I wanted to. But that was pretty much it for that. I didn't have much about the gender roles, but I wanted to touch on it because I know most people found that as a huge topic that they wanted to talk about, and kind of like briefly brush over the fact that it didn't bother me and I didn't feel that there was a need to discuss it, but because there was so much like talk about it that I felt that I needed to put my own opinion out there. I just know that it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm gonna kind of move into the positive aspects and some of the things that I really enjoyed about this. And I know that it's not a novel, that it's just bonus content. It's not a standalone novel. But I thought there were some things that were different from what I remember of reading of Twilight. There were some things that were different that I really, really enjoyed. And I know that in the very beginning, Stephenie Meyer leaves a note saying how there are some things that she definitely did change, things that she added in, because she felt like there were conversations that she wanted to add into the old Twilight, but wasn't able to, and kind of made it flow. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is Edith's character and some of the conversations that she has with Beau. I don't quite remember if they were in Twilight, so I can't say like, oh yeah, this conversation wasn't in Twilight. But there were definitely quite a few conversations that Edith has with Beau that I thought were just beautifully done and kind of helped me see both of these characters a little bit more. And I think that goes along with the fact that of me thinking that Edith and Beau were stronger main characters than Bella and Edward. And I think that's just because of the fact that Stephenie Meyer had more time with this. She'd spent 10 years really looking over Twilight and seeing things that she wanted to change and things she wanted to add. And so I think definitely having that time really made the story stronger and helped each character kind of grow in a sense. So I know that this takes place over, a couple of months. So it's not a very long like timeline for them to like get to know each other. And I think the fact that she did it so like seamlessly by having these conversations and having these moments between the two of them, that it really made it seem like their relationship was real and stronger and had that like easygoing feel to it. And I know I kind of briefly talked about earlier is the obsession that Beau kind of has with Edith. And I kind of understand it, and I think it has to do with the fact that there's an underlying theme of kind of soulmates that Stephenie Meyer doesn't like straight out say like, yes, these are soulmates. But she does kind of give that like feeling of soulmates. So like Jasper and Alice are supposed to be soulmates. Bella and Edward are supposed to be soulmates. Jacob and Renesmee are supposed to be, soulmates. And the werewolves have that. So Jacob has the imprinting, which is basically like soulmates, but like you have to like eye contact. Like eye contact is how you know. And that's usually what happens in werewolf stories. And I like the fact that it wasn't very obviously done. So I don't have a problem with the obsession aspect. I think that kind of works for their relationship because of the fact that these, I mean, at least in my opinion, are supposed to be like soulmates and people who are supposed to be together. So I definitely think that that was well done. Another thing that I want to talk about is one of my favorite moments in the book is at the very end, we have Beau become a vampire. And basically it's different from Bella's experience because of the fact that he is made a vampire at the very end of the Twilight novel. So Bella has that moment with James where he bites her in the ballet studio, and Edward has to suck the venom out so that it doesn't turn her into a vampire and it doesn't kill her. So they have that moment. And what I liked about this is that Stephenie Meyer kind of sets up the fact that Edith gets there a little too late, so it's too late for her to suck out the venom from Bo, and so he can either die or she can turn him. And so there's this great moment between her and Archie where they kind of have a conversation, and they, talk about the fact that Archie has seen the fact that Bo becomes a vampire or can become a vampire. And so they kind of have that brief, tit for tat where she's like, no, I want it to be his choice. And so he does. He does choose to become a vampire. And there's this great long description. And I know for some people, if they've read this book, or people who are in the future will read this book and kind of see it, they might think that it's a little bit too much and it drags on for too long. But I thought that the pacing was kind of right for the fact that we're supposed to be going along with Bo in this transformation. And it's something that we didn't get with Bella because she dies. While giving birth to Renesmee, she dies, and then Edward has to put the venom into her afterwards. And so I thought that being able to follow along with Bo while he's conscious, because while Bella's dead, she doesn't have a moment of recollection, and she can't kind of describe that process of what it means to become a vampire and what it feels like. And there's brief descriptions, and there's the movie. But I think that this was by far one of my favorite moments because it kind of let me into a different part that I wasn't always completely sure about. So we get told of how a transformation happens through the original Twilight series, from the 4 books, through different people. So Alice kind of gives a description, and in this book, Archie gives a description of what it is, what it's like to go through the process and what it means, but Archie doesn't remember his process either. So the fact that Bella never gets to have this moment of this is what it felt like and this is what it was for me, was really interesting and kind of left me with that idea of, oh, so we get hearsay, not an actual experience of feeling it. And for Bo, he gets to feel this, all of it. He's not dead. He's very much conscious for it all. And so it was very interesting to have that moment of, having him be one way, which is human, and kind of being hurt and injured and, this state of very vulnerable human, humanity. And then seeing him go through this process of becoming a vampire and how painful it is, and how, he goes through these different stages of pain and then numbness and then pain again and then feeling nothing. And it's just so well done that it put me in a place where I'm I can see this happening. I know what's going on. I know what it, what the process is to, what it will feel like and what it'll be like if I were to ever become a vampire. Those kinds of things, those little details that kind of helped you see and feel and understand the process of becoming a vampire, and then seeing the end result and kind of the difference and the way that Bo kind of thinks about how how different it is, and how he went from looking one way to looking another way after he was a vampire and after the process was complete. And I just thought it was really well done, and I really, really liked it. And so I thought that was just one of the stronger points in the novel because of the fact that, you get a brand new experience that you kind of didn't have before, and definitely filled in those plots of, questions that I had from the Twilight series. One of the other things that I kind of want to talk about is the ending. So I guess it's technically an epilogue and not, an extra chapter, but I thought that the moment of Bo's funeral was both sad enough and was both fulfilling enough that I didn't need any more. So there's the moment where Bo has his funeral and everybody's going to his funeral, and he's in a tree with Edith and they're kind of watching it from afar. And I just thought it was really well done in kind of describing, his funeral, what it looked like, what the people at the funeral looked like, Charlie, his mom, those kinds of things I thought were really well done. And I like the fact that there's this moment where Bo gets to see Julie's dad, I forget her name, or Julie's mom, because it's not dad anymore, it's mom. But Julie's mom, and they kind of have this conversation. She's like, that's not Bo, the Bo that I knew. And he's like, no, it's me. And so I thought it was a really good kind of standoff between the vampires and the werewolves that we kind of get later in the series, for the Twilight series. But we got to see in the very first book, technically. And I thought it was a bit of a cliffhanger because I really wanted to see like how the relationship between the werewolves and the vampires kind of would escalate from here. And I did want more on Julie because of the fact that Julie doesn't know about the werewolves or the vampires yet, but will eventually, in the future know about this kind of stuff, and Bo will get to like talk to her about that stuff. And I wanted a moment between the two of them. But I guess I just get to imagine that because it's not in this book. And it did feel a bit like a cliffhanger, but at the same time, it was enough for me that I didn't need it was like that kind of like nagging in the back, like, I want more. But overall, I was very satisfied with the ending. And I thought that it was a nice kind of little way to think about, like, what if Bella had just been turned, at the first book. And that's kind of what Stephanie Meyer's, like, thought process when creating this was, is the fact that she wanted to know, what if the book hadn't gone on for 3 more? What if it had ended at Twilight? And I kind of like that idea of having, this story to kind of fall back on. And you don't have to read it as, you can kind of fill it in with, girl versus guy type of thing if you want to think about it in Bella's point of view, if Bella had been the one to end as a vampire at the end of Twilight. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of have that, go back and forth for it. And it was just really good. And I thought it was an interesting way to do that. So, yeah. I think that's everything for my spoiler-filled review. I really, really enjoyed this book. It was really great to kind of fangirl over the things that I knew from Twilight and kind of just go over everything that was, in that world, because it's been a while since I've read the books. And to be able to go back with something kind of new and fresh was really, really interesting, and I really, really enjoyed it. So for Life and Death Twilight Reimagined, because so I'm going to give 2 different reviews or 2 different ratings for this one, just because I feel like there should be, because I kind of read it in 2 different ways. I read it, kind of subconsciously as a standalone novel, and I also subconsciously read it as a, bonus content for, the Twilight series. So I'm going to start off with the standalone novel rating, and I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, just because of the fact that there was a lot of questions, like if you hadn't read the Twilight series and you kind of just wanted to read this on its own. There were a lot of questions that I had, and definitely a lot of things that I kind of pinpointed that could, be disorienting, for some readers. So I think a 3.5 is kind of where I'm at with this as a standalone novel. But as bonus content, I thought it was a 4 out of 5 stars. Just because it was really nice. It kind of brought me back to, the time of when I was a fan of Twilight. And so I just really enjoyed it for that. So definitely as bonus content, a 4. And as a standalone novel, I'd say a 3.5, just because there's questions. And there's just a lot that needs to be explained, but is explained if you read the Twilight novels. So thank you guys for watching my video on Life and Death Twilight Reimagined, my book review. And I really hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, please leave a comment, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you want more. And the next book that I will be reviewing is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!